maintenance. If you are altering or repairing or improving a structure, foundation, or a utility, you know, consider it construction. And just because it's construction don't necessarily mean that DFCM's got to be involved in it, because, and we'll get into that a little later, there's certain thresholds and limits that dictate when that is the case. So anyway, any other questions when it comes to that? And maybe we'll have your questions right here. So Jill, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So this is an everyday question for the people that I work with and the people on my team. Sometimes we have purchase orders that are submitted or requested from us, and I always tell the project management assistants, you know, we need to really screen those requests and look at what the scope that they're providing is, and then ask these questions to determine if it's construction or not. Because for the most part with DFCM, we put all construction, regardless of how small it is or how large it is, on a contract, and we don't issue purchase orders. So my group is just constantly reevaluating what that is. Some of the questions that we came up with to give you guys that you can ask yourself when you're trying to determine if it's construction or not is, does it exceed the scope of scheduled or preventative maintenance? You know, if you're doing a routine maintenance on an HVAC unit, like Anthony said, and it leads to other things that come up while you're doing that, then it very well may cross over into construction.
Quick question, Jill.
Yeah.
Is there a dollar amount minimum that DFCM does their projects?
Do you mean, is there to clarify, is there a dollar amount where DFCM has to do the project or where an agency can do their own? Is that the question?
I'm not sure. Let me read it exactly as it says. Is there a dollar amount minimum that DFCM do projects?
No, we will do any construction project for the most part. Usually we don't get the requests for the real small stuff. That's usually done at an agency level, because most of the agencies will have either a DFCM managed facility and we have maintenance staff, or they might have their own maintenance staff. But a lot of those very low dollar value projects are completed just by the local staff that's there.
So she did clarify. She says, is it all construction or is it only above a certain amount, 50,000, for example?
Okay. And we will get in, I'll jump in here, Jill, real quick. So we'll get into this a little bit later, I believe, but so DFCM, if an agency has a request, whether, I know somebody said a note, a $50,000 project, yes, we will manage that project for you. We'd be happy to manage that. Or even a $10,000 project, if an agency came up and says, hey, we don't have the resources to manage this, will you take care of it for us? Yes, we would do that. It is not statutorily required, and we'll get into those limits later, but typically if it's got a value of over $100,000, then that triggers some other processes that DFCM would need to get involved after that point. And I'll get into that in more detail a little bit later. So, but definitely if it's under $100,000, the agency can manage that themselves without DFCM involvement, but they do have to follow process, code, all that. Once it exceeds that threshold, then DFCM needs to at least get involved, and we'll talk about some of the different ways a little later. So,
yeah. Okay. So some of the other questions that we ask internally is, obviously, does the work create a new footprint? You know, are you expanding a space? If you answer yes to any of these questions, then it's going to be yes, it is construction. Does it change the building's function? Does the work alter any of the main building systems or installed equipment? Does the work require a permit? Building permits, electrical, mechanical. Are there inspections, code inspections, or special inspection requirements? Does it touch or alter accessibility or ADA? Is a portion of the work governed by any one of our regulatory agencies, like the Division of Air Quality, Water Quality? Does it require a specialized contractor? And does it require a DOPL license? And that we'll talk about more about licensing in just a bit, but those are just some of the the questions and the examples that we can give you to ask. I know that the information that we're giving you, like I said, is going to be very muddy. But if you run upon a situation where it's complex and you've gone through what you consider to be a good analysis and you still can't come to an answer of your own, you can reach out to any person here at DFCM on the construction side of the house, and we will be more than willing to help you get that question answered at any time. Email, phone call, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Oh, is there another question?
Yeah, just real quick, Jill. I have people that are like newer on my team too, and NIGP here. As always, people who are in different stages of their career and experience. Can you explain why this is an important classification and why maintenance versus construction has a big bearing from the start? Does it change the route? Does it change the requirements? And why is this so important to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I can give you some insight on that, and Daryl probably can too. But so construction, the contracting requirements, are going to be different. There's a lot of time when there's warranty involved, right? There's maybe something comes with a warranty versus if you're maintaining something that's not really a factor. There's bonding that we'll talk about for the work to protect the state and, protect our interests. There are safety, that's a huge one, obviously, safety issues, code requirements that have to be followed, which, that's huge. When you think of safety and you think of a new building, right, you're not just thinking of, is this building built well enough to the extent where it's not going to collapse on someone? But there's also other factors to consider, like the wiring, right? The wiring inside the building. If you have someone in there messing around with that, or someone who's not licensed and doesn't know what they're doing as a part of the maintenance, then that can create hazards down the road. It can start fires, burn the building down, injure people. So knowing where that delineating line is in situations like that is important, because that's when you're crossing over into that maybe a more risky category, right? So the risk becomes greater. I guess that's my input on that. Daryl?
Yep, and I'd just like to expand on that a little bit, because sometimes, there's a question on, okay, is this maintenance or is this construction? And you don't always have to hire a contractor if you consider construction. As a state agency, we can, if we have the resources in-house, we can do construction in-house. That's something that don't have to be procured and outsourced, if you will. But we do have the ability to do construction activities within our own organizations if we have the qualified staff to do it. It can't be, we're going to hire these guys to do it. But if it's a full-time employee that we have that's got the qualifications, they can do construction activities. We don't have to hire that out. And it could be almost anything. It could be building a new building. If, some state agencies think, hey, we got the resources, we can build this ourselves, or we can replace this rooftop unit ourselves, or something like that. And if you have the resources in-house to do that, you can do that, even if it's construction versus maintenance. And I'm not sure if that's one of the reasons for some of these questions on the difference between maintenance and construction, because we can do construction internally. So you just still need to follow the same guidelines as far as code, if you need design, stuff like that.
Yeah, code is going to be huge in every consideration, or in every respect. We consider code. That's one of the first questions we always ask. Is this $5,000 job that they're requesting, does it have code implications? Because a lot of the time, I would say at least a good 50% of the time it does. If you're putting up a fence, you're altering a door, you're restriping a parking lot, and when there's handicap stalls, like you never really know unless you really think about it and ask yourself the question. There's never really an automatic answer. So the code implications are going to be the biggest piece of that, in my opinion. Okay, so we threw a few trivia questions in here, so just use a thumbs up or a thumbs down and we'll see kind of what the majority thinks. Okay. Repaving a cracked asphalt parking lot. Would this be classified as construction or not? Great, yes. This is construction. This is a repair and rehabilitation of a facility or the parking lot as a structure. Okay. An elevator repair contractor comes to the TSOB to install new software on the elevator's computer system to make it run faster. Maybe these are too easy. Yeah. Even though the elevator is part of the facility, the software is operational maintenance. It does not physically repair, remodel, or alter the physical structure or its mechanical components. So with elevators, if you are altering the mechanical components of the elevator, there is an elevator contractor license out there, and that repair is going to be considered construction. Okay. All right. Massive data center. This was poor timing for this one. Replaces 500 lead acid batteries sitting on racks that are bolted to the floor in the uninterruptible power supply room. The answer is no. So that one was a little bit trickier than the others. Batteries are consumable components of a system similar to a light bulb. Unless the technician alters the racks, hardwires them, being the batteries, to the building's electrical system or alters the room to fit them, swapping a battery out would be considered a service or maintenance and not construction. Okay, one more. Contractors hired to remove 50 years of lead-based paint from the exterior of a multi-agency building. Once the paint is stripped, they apply a new protective sealant. They do not replace any bricks or wood. Okay, this one's a little bit of a mixed bag. Yes, this is construction. This is a major rehabilitation of the facility's surfaces. Removing hazardous materials and restoring the protective envelope of a permanent structure is a core construction activity. All right, thank you for indulging me on that. Okay, any more questions at this point before we move on to licensing? Okay. So Title 58, Chapter 55, which is the Utah Construction Trade Licensing Act, or DOPL's, what their directive is under this. A construction trade means work that involves construction, remodeling, repairing, erecting, et cetera, et cetera. So we're focusing on trades here for a minute. During the last legislative session, back in January, there were a ton of changes made to this statute. And so that's why I put up that second picture on the bottom right. Everything in red has been replaced with basically everything in blue. So there was a whole bunch of changes made around this. And I tell you what, I was educated a little bit when I was researching this for this presentation. And I know Tara asked that I reach out to someone at DOPL, but just like the comment was made, I wasn't able to get that handled and get someone from their team to respond or be available for training today. So I apologize for that, but I did some research on my own to be able to give you guys some information to take away from today. First and foremost, I would not suggest that you go and read all of these statutes. It's really a lot of information. It is very complex, and there's a lot of ifs, ands, or, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to make you aware right now that there's been a lot of things that have changed. And so what you're hearing or what you're being told, may or may not be the same. Next, Title 58, Chapter 55 says that a person engaged in a construction trade or acting as a contractor shall obtain a license under this chapter before performing work. unless they're exempt from licensure. Now, in summary, what this is telling us is if there's a license for the work being performed, then they have to have it. That's what this equates to. These are the licensing categories under this chapter that are going to need licenses. Now, the actual work that is being performed under these licenses or the work that's performed that's required to have a license is all defined in that chapter 55, which again, like I said, that is something that you would constantly need to refer to if you're having these types of questions, if a license is required or not. For DFCM, we basically require a license for everything, just across the board. And the majority of what you're going to come across, that is also going to be the case. There are certain activities that are defined that don't need a license. However, those activities, just because they don't need a license doesn't mean they're not construction. So we don't want to convolute those two definitions there.
Jill?
Yeah.
So just so I can jump in there. So just to clarify, it goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Whenever we hire somebody that's not within our organization, licensing requirements would apply. And so, but if we're doing something in-house, the state is exempt from licensing requirements, but still we have to be qualified and follow any other regulations. And so, for example, there are going to be trades out there that may not require a license. Let's talk about flooring, carpet replacements. I know that's a big one. Is carpet construction? You know, if we're just replacing carpet. Yes, it is, but it's pretty straightforward. But at certain levels, flooring or replacing carpeting, I shouldn't say flooring because flooring could extend into a lot of things, but replacing carpet, there may not be a licensing requirement, but the majority of contractors that are going to do that do have a license because flooring can get into so many other aspects where a license is required. So we don't want to be the DOPL police and say, okay, this is what a license is required for and this is what not. So if there's questions when you're hiring somebody to do any trade, lean on a license should be required and always ask the question. And there's going to be very few instances where no, a license is not required. The majority are going to be, yes, a license is required when we're hiring someone to do something for us.
Yeah. This is a common misunderstanding out there that there's a handyman license. There's not an actual handyman license out there for the state of Utah. The state of Utah has a handyman registry. And if anyone is performing repairs or odd jobs valued over $1,000 and up to $3,000, they have to have registered with DOPL as a handyman. And that's not an actual license. These people are restricted to basically minor maintenance, finish work and repairs. They cannot pull permits. They cannot perform standalone structural, plumbing, electrical, HVAC work without the appropriate specialty or general contractor license. So that handyman factor it's a very small range. I would definitely not err on them only having to have, this as a requirement being registered in that system. All right, Daryl.
Okay, before we start talking about bonds, any questions up to this point before I get into bonds? Okay, so we're just going to talk about bonds a little bit. What is a contract bond? And it is protection for the owner. It is basically just an insurance policy. And we have bid bonds, which typically they're required at the time of bidding. If a contractor gives us a bid, they give us a bid bond, and it just ensures that their bid's good and they're not throwing us numbers and wasting our time. Payment and performance bonds is what we get when we go into construction to protect not only the owner, but the subcontractors, so they're paid and whatnot. As far as bond requirements, any construction contract that is estimated to exceed $50,000 is required to have a bid bond in the amount of 5% of the contractor's bid. And the same requirements are in place for performance and payment bonds. You know, any project that's anticipated to exceed $50,000 should have that bonding requirement associated with it. When you go out and do your procurement process and your estimate's over $50,000, that's when the bonding requirement should be identified to all your bidders, not after the bid and whatnot. So, and just for clarification, just recently, just this past session, and it's already went into effect, House Bill 508 actually exempted DFCM from the payment and performance bond requirements. And we did not get exempted from the bid bond requirement, so we still require a bid bond on all our projects over our threshold. But even though we are exempt from payment and performance bonds, we're still requiring them because we feel it's still insurance and protection for us, the owners, that we're still going to require. All of our development projects, basically all of our new construction, new square footage, bonds will be required. The only time that we're going to exempt a bond is if we have a very straightforward project that's typically one trade doing all the work and it's under $1 million threshold. If we get into multiple trade projects and they're still small, we are still requiring bonds just because there's more risk there to the project.
Yeah, to add to that, DFCM didn't introduce the legislation that exempted us from this bonding. That wasn't something that we pushed for or asked for or wanted. I think it came from a place of trying to lower the cost of our projects and cutting that cost out, because we do allow contractors to, we say you include the cost of the bond in your bid. So I think that was the idea behind that.
Yeah.
Also, to clarify, that performance bond is basically what you can collect on if the contractor doesn't complete the project, walks away from it,
Yep.
throws their hands up and says, we're done, we're not finishing this. And then the payment bond typically just applies to subcontractors that are not, if they're not getting paid from the general, right? Sometimes we hear about those here and there. Subs will want to collect on the contractor's bond that they submitted to us, and that's what that's in place for, so that general can't get away with not paying their subs.
Yep. And the subs still have to register the project and whatnot. And I know that I think I seen another question from Anthony on, I thought the limit was $100,000 on bonding requirements. And in DFCM's rule R23, yes, our bonding limit is $100,000, but by statute, I believe that unless your own rules change something, the bonding limit is $50,000. But per rule, DFCM is at $100,000. And well, we're exempt now, but it used to be $100,000. So I should clarify that. So.
Yeah, that change didn't exempt anyone else but DFCM, and DFCM was the only one with a different limit of 100,000, where purchasing's rule has 50,000, statute shows 50,000, and K through 12 will also be held to 50,000.
Yeah, and it's really pretty cheap insurance, and it depends on your contractors, the rate's not the same. It depends on your contractor's history and stuff like that. But bonds are typically going to cost from 1.5% to maybe 2.5%, maybe as high as 3% if a contractor's maybe a little bit more risky than others. So waiving bonds. And so again, DFCM is exempt. So if we chose to, we could just not have bonds on all our projects, but again, we are not planning on doing that. But if you have a project or considering waiving bonds, purchasing rule, and I believe there's this same language in statute as well, but the procurement official may waive any bonding requirement if it is determined in writing by the procurement official that bonds cannot be reasonably obtained for the work involved, and maybe that's certain trades, or it depends on what kind of construction you're doing, because they're just not used to bonding, and so they don't have that ability. And the cost of the bond exceeds the risk to the procurement unit. So low risk project, maybe say, hey, there's no risk here. I'm going to pay more for a bond. Like that 2% that I got to pay for a bond is going to exceed the risk that we see is on the project. And bonds are not necessary to protect the interest of the procurement unit. And so this is a question, if you're going out to bid, that, again, it's the procurement official that has the ability to do that. That's third call. And that you really need to justify, okay, why would I waive bonds? And again, it comes down to the risk of the project. And risk is on a new build, new construction, there's a lot of risk there because there's a lot of liability that the contractor could potentially walk away from and leave the owner. Okay, now what do I do? That's where the bond's going to protect you. Let's say you're at a school and you're on summer break and you're going to recarpet all the classrooms, and you're going to spend $400,000 or $1 million or whatever that is. You might say, hey, I'm not saying yes or no, waive or not waive, but you could determine, hey, this is low risk because I know I'm not going to pay for the material till I see it and it's on site and we got all the carpet and whatnot. And if the contractor then walks away and that, it's pretty easy to go out and hire somebody else to do this because it's pretty straightforward scope work. Where if I'm in the middle of replacing a complex mechanical system in a building and the contractor walks away from it in the middle, it's going to be very difficult to hire somebody else to come in and pick up where he left off because they don't know what he's done. So, that's maybe an example I would use, what I would look at as far as if I was looking at waiving bonds on my projects. I'd say, no, we need bonds on this one because if in the middle of the project, a contractor walked away or went bankrupt or whatever, it's going to be very difficult for me to have somebody step in and take over. And so I'm going to let the bonding company deal with that and cover the costs of what that's going to be. On a carpet replacement, I might say, hey, I don't see the risk here because if for whatever reason they did walk away in the middle, something happened, it's going to be pretty simple for me to still get that done and not risk a lot of money. So,
Daryl, can we roll back just a minute? I did not catch whether or not you responded to the all charter schools. Do they have to do bonds as well?
yes, all public and I believe it's even private projects over these limits. I'd have to go back and look at the statute for sure, but I believe all projects over $50,000 in the state by law should be bonded.
And charter schools should be considered state property,
Yeah.
correct?
And again, I'm not even sure that the bonds are only private projects. I do believe are not exempt from the bonding requirements. Now, don't quote me on that. I'd have to go. I'm not an expert in that field,
But charter school, yes, they are.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, so, and this is a question we had earlier. So what projects require DFCM management? And again, there was some legislation this year in House Bill 508 that changed things and created us to figure out, okay, how do we manage this? And so there could be some confusion here on when DFCM needs to be involved or not, because when it comes to state facilities, projects with construction cost, regardless of the funding source, is greater than 1.5 million. A state entity may exercise direct supervision over the design and construction. The total project cost, regardless of funding source, is 1.5 million or less, and the state entity ensures compliance with the division's forms, contracts, and the division's design, construction, alteration, repair, improvement, and code inspection standards. But before exercising direct supervision, the state entity shall enter into a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, with DFCM before they move forward. So even though they've got the flexibility to now manage, because the limit used to be $100,000. If it was over $100,000, they had to get an MOU to manage that project. The limit has now been raised to 1.5 million, but an MOU is still required. To even go one step farther, House Bill 508 eliminated the $100,000 threshold. So the MOU potentially would be required on any projects from $1 to any project period up to the $1.5 million threshold would require an MOU. Per rule in R2329, I believe it is, we are currently changing that to where it eliminates the MOU requirement and reporting requirements on projects under $100,000. So by rule, that will change because DFCM definitely does not want to do MOUs on every project that is out there for under $100,000 because I would have to hire a full-time MOU person just to keep up on all of them. We do not want to do that. And state agencies, if you do have projects that are under the 1.5, we're more than happy to work with you on getting an MOU in place. There's still going to be DFCM project managers to assign because you still have to go through a process and show us that, okay, how do you procure it? We want to see the closeout documents. We want to make sure that it's permitted property, code inspected, and closed out. And that's the reason the MOU is still in place, because there's still that oversight, even though there might not be a full-time DFCM project manager assigned to it, you still are required to go through the process and meet all the legal requirements of those projects.
Okay, any questions about that? Great. Okay, our
We
last.
did have one pop-up, just a second. It said, I'm told that R23-1-1102 says the limit is 100K and not 50K.
Let me hurry and pull that exact statute up and I will.
R23 is DFCM's rule
Yep.
for DFCM managed projects. Our rule hasn't been updated.
Anthony, do you just want to hop on and ask the question?
I just was passing on. People on my team said I don't get the 50K because R3, 1102 still all says 100K.
But
Or,
that's on bonding, right? I'd have to,
bid security requirements.
yeah, that's bonding. But that's only for DFCM. That's DFCM's rule. And my computer's wanting to freeze up on me now when I tried to open that rule.
For the University of Utah, and I haven't worked with Jim, but Ken always went with R23 whenever he used the bonding information.
Which we have an MOU for. So if we have an
Right.
MOU, are we considered DFCM? Therefore, this
Yes.
applies to us?
Yeah,
But
we
if
have
you're
a
not
DFCM
DFCM
delegation.
So again, we're back to the bonding question, correct?
Yeah.
So it would be if you've adopted DFCM standards and rules and that's the policy you follow. Because again, R23 is a DFCM rule, and if you adopt that, just like higher ed, if your purchasing guidelines, my understanding is you can adopt the standard you want, but you have to adopt it. You've got to adopt that as your standard.
I think the University of Utah did adopt R23, which would put you, in line with the 100,000 now. But I believe that a new statute does not exempt other agencies outside of DFCM to waive all bonds, all
Right.
payment performance bonds.
That's correct. DFCM is the only one that is exempt from bonds. The contract has to be held with DFCM to exempt bonds. Any other institution or agency is still required to meet bonding requirements. And per statute, that limit is $50,000, and per purchasing rule, it's $50,000. And so if there's any deviation from that, and I can't get into your rules or anything like that for anybody else, but it would have to be per your rule or what you've adopted that's in your rules and policy.
Okay, so the next topic that was asked to be covered is the legislation that came from SB 164 for public school construction oversight. This statute basically transfers construction oversight for K through 12 from the Utah State Board of Education to DFCM. This is a huge topic right now, internally as well as externally, I'm sure. I'm going to pull up our website. For those of you that don't know, on the DFCM website, I'm going to have to present something else. Let's see. Okay. On the DFCM website, so dfcm.utah.gov, at the top of the page in the ribbon on the far right, Public School Construction Program. This is a new tab that we have added to keep LEAs and anyone else who's interested updated on what's going on. The first clarification I want to make is that even though the statute says that this new law is effective July 1st, the transition is not happening until January 1st of 2027. So all of the things that are changing and that DFCM is creating and putting into place are going to take place January 1st of 2027. So the information on it kind of gives you an overview of what this legislation is and the requirement. But recently, as of May 22nd, we added this transition roadmap to the page, and it's intended to give you information about what we're working on right now and where we're going here in the future. So over the past 60 days or so, it was basically just a discussion period, right? Like DFCM, again, this is not a bill that we introduced, and it wasn't something that, we asked to happen. Nevertheless, it did happen. And so we waited until the bill actually got signed to start actually making some hard decisions about how to move forward. So it's only been, a couple of months that we've had to work on this. Over the next 90 days, these are the things that we're going to be working on. So there's a cost matrix development requirement. There's an online portal development requirement. Our new policies, updating the rules, and the form standardization, which will replace the USBE forms that were currently in place. Industry pre-qualification. So there's a huge component in the statute for contractor pre-qualification, code inspector pre-qualification, and also for plan reviewers. So we're going to be releasing that at the 1st of August for any contractors, code inspectors, and plan reviewers who currently do work for K through 12 that want to continue to do work for K through 12. They're going to need to be pre-qualified through this process and get on our list. Also, we're also reviewing documentation that we've asked from the different LEAs to review how they're currently doing things, and to provide early stage delegation at different levels. And then we're going to be providing training, and that'll probably all be delivered and ready to go at the UFOMA concert this fall. That I believe it's September 28th, 29th, and 30th. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we do have some answers, but we don't have all the answers. If you do have a question that you think of later, this page also allows you to submit your question here, and it gets routed to one of the 3 or 4 of us that can answer it to get back to you on that.
Can you grab that URL and drop it in the chat or something? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? And that's all the time. I was worried about not taking all the time.
There's
all
one
those
question there in the
change-
chat. If you could roll up to Kevin's first question that starts, I just want to be clear. Would you address that one?
Okay. I just want to be clear, if we are a special district or local district, we wouldn't be a part of DFCM, but still required to do the bonds. Is it just performance bonds required or all of the bond types? Okay, so the new statute that will also have those requirements built into the rule changes that we make does require that $50,000 payment and performance bonds on any construction project, and also requires the bid bond.
Specifically, the special districts and local districts must abide by that as well.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Is that last slide you showed then the representation of what the changes you alluded to that are coming Jan 1? Or is that like, is there more to that? than that?
There are so many things in that bill. The statute has been updated. It's 63A5B Part 12. I'll put that in the chat. And if you want to take a look at that, it will give you everything that is changing, basically. There's a lot. And we know that we have a lot to work on and deliver. There's a lot of changes. It may give the appearance of creating more work for the LEAs, but we believe the opposite. We think it's going to help streamline things and make it more efficient.
Even though you didn't ask for it, but do we know who did?
That information is available online.
Okay, thank you.
So if you could pull up your chats, a couple other chats have come in, or questions have come in.
Okay.
So,
Well-
yep. So Cindy, myself, or my project managers are always available on, I'm not sure which process you're talking, if you're talking about bonds or just construction versus maintenance or whatever, but project managers, myself, were available for any construction project related questions. So any improvement, anything you've got going on at your site, we're a phone call away, I guess. So, or an
No,
email or text, whatever. So,
I'm just asking about the school system, because we
Okay.
do partnerships. So will our project manager for DFCM as a state agency be able to answer the questions? Or do we need to contact yourself or Jill?
So the project management for K through 12 is going to be on it's going to be a delegated item. So we're coming in from the perspective of you're all qualified to do this, to manage your own projects and to continue on as you have been, unless as we go through reviewing documents and processes with each district that we determine that you're not. So from that respect, it should stay the same unless there's a reason to pull that construction management piece back from an LEA. And the same goes to Lori's question about contract management, procurement, and things of that nature. The same goes for that.
nope, I was just going to add that clarification that Cindy's question was about K through 12. DFCM does intend to hire a K through 12 person at some point. There's a lot to figure out, but DFCM will have a resource available to help through the process. And like Jill said, a lot of that, whether it's going to be delegated to the school district or DFCM is going to actually manage it has yet to be determined, but the intent is to delegate to all the qualified districts. So.
Yeah, and we also will manage projects on request. If there's a smaller district out there who doesn't do many projects and doesn't have the people to manage them, and they request our services, then we will do that.
Kevin added another question there near the bottom. You might have to roll.
Previously, the procurement official or board had the authority to waive a bond requirement. Does this new law change that? So that would need to be a request to waive the bond and just to provide justification to DFCM, and then we would be able to waive it.
Jill, is this part 12 that was referenced 5B12 as updated? I'm trying to read the definitions and it seems to me to not, it seems to be K through 12.
And charter schools, yeah, charter schools and K through 12.
It's not, so higher ed is not considered a public school. in this-
Correct.
Okay.
It's public school construction, not higher ed. Those are terms we use, not to be confused with each other. Yeah.
So did Kevin's question get answered previously? The procurement official or board had the authority to waive a bond requirement. Does this new law change that? And so if we're referring to 508, the only change there is DFCM is exempt. Nobody else is exempt, and it does not impact any requirements with K through 12.
So he did specify now it's special district. So here's my question to
Yeah.
help maybe clarify. Are the bond requirements in the code?
Yes.
Yes.
And so DFCM has been exempted using that code. Everyone else, the code still says you have to have the bond requirement.
Yep.
And are they allowed to exempt themselves in their rules? I would
Well-
assume not, because in purchasing, we say the rule can't trump the code.
Right. No, they're not. And the statute also says that it specifically says exempt for DFCM only.
So what I'm saying is they were probably waiving the bonds before without permission.
Well, there's two different things. Being exempt is not waive, at least in my opinion. If you waive a
Oh.
bond, your procurement officer has the ability on a project per project basis, they have to look at it and look at the risk,
Okay.
is the way I interpret it. And I did finally get R 23-1-1102 to pull up, and I believe is that Anthony that brought that up. It does appear that if agencies meet certain requirements, that threshold could apply to them up to $100,000, but anything regardless up over $100,000, bonds are required unless it's justified and documented that for whatever reason it was waived.
But that would be if they adopted R23.
So.
Okay. Thanks, Jill and Daryl, for coming. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.